Hey, good evening, morning, afternoon, whenever you're listening to this. This is Dean Legge. Welcome to another edition of the Dean Legge Show here on Dog Post. News breaking today, something that people like me have been talking about for some time, which is that Georgia and Notre Dame will play one another at night on CBS. Really not a surprise if you've been reading, Dog Post. One first indication was that there were the rumblings that CBS wanted this game at night. And then I think I reported earlier in the year, whenever it was, that CBS would probably move the window from LSU, Alabama in November towards the beginning of the season with Notre Dame. Really, because CBS has made a concerted effort to get Notre Dame on its schedule at least every other year because they have the contract with Navy. CBS, so they can broadcast the Notre Dame Navy game every other year, when Navy is the home team. And then this year, obviously, they will get Georgia Notre Dame, which is a primetime game, 8 o'clock. Now, that means probably 8:20, which means you probably won't get out of the stadium until 11:45. 11:45 is when the game should end, so good luck on that one, downtown Athens. But there's a lot of stuff to discuss. I did want to touch about the Notre Dame game and the decision by CBS to announce it now. They didn't have to, according to the contract that they've had with with the SEC forever. But you're talking about Georgia, the number 2 TV program in the country behind Alabama, just more viewership than anyone these last 2 years, and then obviously the iconic brand that is Notre Dame. They played for the national championship. Well, they've only played for it once in the last 7 years, but they've been in the playoff. Obviously, they've been on a playoff discussion. This is going to be a huge game for both schools. The Vanderbilt game for Georgia is probably the biggest hurdle for both teams combined. The first 3 weeks for both teams are not very good, generally speaking. So this will probably be a top 10 matchup. It could be as much as a top 5 matchup. And make no mistake about it, Notre Dame was the team that jumped Georgia to get into the playoff. I say jumped. I mean, Oklahoma technically jumped, but Oklahoma, I thought, deserved to be in there. I'm not so sure Notre Dame did last year, and they did not look very good when they played in the playoff. You have to wonder if they were really one of the best 4 teams in the country. Most people didn't think so, but the playoff committee did. So that is just a huge game for CBS. And I talk a lot on Dog Post about television, the money, on finances for athletic departments, but TV really runs the show. And for Notre Dame and Georgia, this game should be the place marker for the biggest game of the year. And we'll just see where it goes from there. I mean, if you have Georgia, Florida, both undefeated, rolling into Jacksonville, that's probably going to get close to big numbers. I don't know. Once you start putting a game in prime time, I don't know who this will go up against, but it probably won't be Clemson. I mean, obviously it will not be Alabama. So there's not, and Clemson doesn't really draw the same way the SEC schools do, typically because of the teams they play. But they're not a big audience dragger for TV, not compared to the SEC schools. And not for compared to winning the national championship 2 of the last 3 years. So this should be a big number. I don't think it would be like an Ohio State Notre Dame or an Ohio State Georgia or Texas Ohio State, something like that. But or even Michigan Georgia. So there are some Big Ten schools that just have huge audiences, and Ohio State, and Michigan are 2 of those schools. But in the last 2 years, the number 1 school in terms of total audience has been Alabama. Number 2 behind them has been Georgia. I would imagine Clemson would have to be 3. I would need to go do my math on that. I'm not certain that it's Clemson. It could be Ohio State, but I know Alabama and Georgia are 1 and 2. So you get this game that will be built up over the first month of the season. And Georgia's going to be considered a 10-point favorite or so, something like that. They will be a significant home favorite over Notre Dame. Notre Dame was a 5-point favorite over the Dogs when they went up there, and there were reasons why. I mean, one reason was Georgia didn't have its starting quarterback going into that game. So, obviously Georgia won that game by a point, and then they took it from there. But this really is shaping up to be the game. I mean, I can't imagine how ESPN would duck this game for game day. So, on campus, this is going to be certainly the biggest game since 2013 LSU, and maybe even before that, maybe 1998 Tennessee, when Georgia was 4-0 and the Vols were 4-0, and I think that was a top 8 matchup or top 5, whatever it was, and Tennessee just rolled Georgia that day, but 22-3. But this game will have a lot to do with what the playoff situation will look like. And Kirby, I want to go to Kirby right now on a question that he got about what it's been like for him in taking his program from sort of a top 10, top 15 team to the brink of a national championship. Here's what he had to say about the difference between what he inherited and what he's got right now.
Probably not as much as it'll mean if we do reach the pinnacle, but they're a great fan base. They're one of the most avid groups there are out there. They support us, and they travel well. They go places. They've been a big part of our recruiting success. When you fill up a spring game with 93,000 people, it's pretty evident that they care about the game of football, and that's what these kids like in recruiting. So they've been a tremendous part of our success. They've embraced our staff and our players, and they will, because football means something in the state of Georgia.
Well, I think that the biggest thing for Kirby and company and is capturing the national championship that has eluded this program multiple times over the last, certainly this century. You'd have to say 3 times at a minimum. Once, I don't think I need to relive all of them necessarily, but I mean, you really could make the case that in 02, 07, 12, and 17, obviously 17, that Georgia, had they had the ability to play for the national championship, would have won it. I mean, I think you certainly could make that case in 2007. 2002, probably the same argument. But we did not have the playoff system, and so other teams have benefited from that, Alabama, but Georgia has not. But I do think that day will come, and if it hasn't, and I don't mean this to be overly dramatic, but it would be not just a disappointment, but probably a failure for Kirby Smart. I mean, when you look at the resources that he's acquired and been given over time, there's nothing standing in Kirby's way, except Alabama, maybe Clemson, but certainly Alabama. And he also talked about getting over the hump, for lack of a better term, against Alabama. Here's what he had to say about that.
Just kind of talk about what you've learned from those, other than, of course, you probably want to win next time.
Yeah, get rid of their backup quarterback, right? I mean, that's part of the plan. But they do a tremendous job, and we haven't finished the way we need to. And to be honest with you, a lot of that goes right here to me. We got to do a better job finishing the game and stay on top of it, and they get some credit for that because they've got a good football program. They've won a lot of football games, and they're a physical team. What I think we've shown is that we can match that physicality. We haven't finished that physicality, but we're not getting shoved around out there, and that's part of the deal against Alabama. You got to be able to go out and play physical.
The funny thing about all of this is that sometimes what you think is going to be in the way isn't. And we can't know if Alabama will be in the championship game in Atlanta. We can't know if Georgia will be. I mean, it's certainly possible that Florida could go 9-3, losing to Florida State, Miami, but beating Georgia, winding up in the and beating Georgia and losing to someone else, but having the one game edge, or even being 10-2 with a win over Georgia, a loss to Miami to start the season, and then lost to LSU, and they lose, and they go 10-3, and they're out of the playoff look. And Georgia's 11-1, Alabama's 11 and 12-0 or 11-1. I mean, you just never know who's going to be there. And this narrative that certainly Georgia will play Alabama in Atlanta, and certainly Alabama will play Clemson for the national championship. It's as if we can't think of anything else but that happening. And life and sports certainly have a very odd way of happening. What you think will happen doesn't happen often. I mean, at media days, we've not correctly picked the SEC champion very often in the last 30 years. Georgia has never been correctly picked by the media in terms of winning it. And even the time that Georgia's been picked once, maybe ever at media days, but I know once for sure they've been picked. That was 2004 to win the SEC championship. Well, they didn't win it that year, and all the other times that they won it and since from 2002 on, when there's been voting that's been kept records of, they weren't picked to win it. I mean, so we can't know. I mean, in 2015, Auburn was picked to win the conference, I think, and they finished 7th in the West. Now, these aren't just anecdotal things. Those things really happened, and we can't know what we don't know. An old Donald Rumsfeld thing. There are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. I think I said that right, but you get the point. Let's just see who's in the path. And Georgia may not be on the track to have someone in their way anyway. I mean, they could lose to Notre Dame for sure. I don't think Vanderbilt's going to be a total pushover, although Georgia has entered that game as a significant favorite on the road. And there are landmines along the way for Georgia, and there are some for Alabama too, just not that many. They're all in the SEC. There's no one that Alabama plays out of conference that's challenging in any way. For Clemson, obviously, they've got to deal with Texas A&M and South Carolina, but they should handle those. And Georgia deals with Texas A&M as well. I mean, the barometer for the season for those three schools, the only school that there are two schools that play Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson. It's South Carolina and Texas A&M. What are the chances that those teams go 0-3 against those three big schools, essentially a collective 0-6? What is the percentage chance that they can't get a win there at all? You would think it's probably that they are not likely to get them. Certainly on an individual case, it seems unlikely. But Alabama has to go to Columbia. Carolina comes to Athens. And let's see. So I think South Carolina plays. Yes, they host Clemson. I couldn't say. I mean, Texas A&M comes to Georgia. They come to Clemson, which means they probably host Alabama. It's an even year. Yes, they would have to. Yeah, evens are in Tuscaloosa. So this is all off the top of my head. So I doubt this is wrong, but it could be. But anyway, nonetheless, let me talk real quick about recruiting. We've got What We're Hearing up on the site. If you are not a member of Dog Post, you're running into a great time to become one. It's $1 for the first month. That's pretty inexpensive. We have high quality posters, people who, if you want clickbait and stuff like that, Dog Post is not the place for you. And that's fine. There's a lot of folks that don't want to pay for content. I get that. But you're going to want to take a look at Dog Post over these next couple of weeks, certainly with the What We're Hearings that we've got going on. But this Jake Fromm feature, which will be out starting next Monday, is going to be something that you're going to want to read. And the first one will be for everyone to read, and after that, you'll have to sign up. And then one thing too, again, I mean, I know not everyone that's watching this is on YouTube, but a lot of this audience is thousands and thousands. Please, if you are on Instagram watching this, or if you're on Twitter, or you're listening to iTunes, next Monday, the 29th, I think it is, when Kendall Milton is committing to whoever in California, that will start at 7:30. I am going to be streaming that, but I am only going to be streaming that on YouTube. There's an explanation for that. It's very technical. More than anything, I just don't feel comfortable pushing it through multiple channels at the same time. So if you're watching right now on Instagram, or you're catching this on Twitter, you need to go to dogpost.com that day Check out the Jake Fromm story. But more than anything, go to YouTube, type in Dog Post, follow us or subscribe, whatever the terminology is. We're getting close to 7,000 subscribers on YouTube, and it's very important that if you want to watch that, I know we will be there. I don't know who else will be there, but I know I will be in California streaming this back to the masses. So go subscribe to us on YouTube. And, again, there's been a lot of reporting from Matt DeBerry here lately on this. This is going to be a huge weekend of recruiting at Georgia. Will they get a commitment over the weekend? They always can. But we feel pretty comfortable by this coming Tuesday, a week from now, Georgia will have not fewer than one commitment than it has right now. They'll have at least one more than they've got right now. Okay, Dean Legge signing off here. Go to dogpost.com if you're listening to us on iTunes and all the other places. Mosey on over to Dog Post. Follow us on Twitter. But next Monday, you need to be on YouTube. Thank you for joining me for another edition of the Dean Legge Show here on Dog Post.